Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. I'm Edward, 29, and if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you there was nothing better than the smell of turkey in the oven, the chaotic energy of relatives arguing about cranberry sauce versus jelly, and the simple tradition of everyone sitting around the table. I loved it so much that I always volunteered to host. I'd get up at 5 a.m. to prep the bird. I'd spend days before cleaning my house, and I'd triple-check every recipe so that when my family walked in, everything felt warm and perfect. But last year changed everything. It started with a weird group text. My mom sent out the usual Thanksgiving dinner at Edwards for PM message, but this time she added, "Everyone bring your appetite. This year will be special." I brushed it off at first. Maybe she meant she was bringing a new dessert recipe or something. But then my cousin Lauren replied, "Oh, I can't wait. This is going to be juicy." And my sister, Claire, just sent a laughing emoji. Something about it made my stomach twist. Over the next few days, I started noticing little comments from family members that didn't sit right. Claire called me and asked if I was ready for a little surprise. My uncle texted me a gif of a turkey running away with the caption, "Better not skip dinner." Even my dad, who usually just shows up, eat, and leaves, told me he hoped I wouldn't get too sensitive this year. Sensitive? About what? At first, I told myself I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to focus on the food, telling myself that if I made the meal flawless, nothing could ruin the day. I marinated the turkey overnight, tried a new stuffing recipe, and even baked 2 different pies because last year someone complained that I only had pumpkin. I wanted everything perfect. The day before Thanksgiving, though, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some extra folding chairs. They weren't home, but my stepmom, Carol, was there with her phone on speaker. She was talking to Claire, and they didn't realize I had walked in. Carol said, "Oh, it's going to be perfect. Everyone will be there, and he won't even see it coming. He needs to be humbled a little." Claire laughed. "Exactly. He thinks he's better than everyone with his house and his job and his perfect Thanksgiving. This will put him in his place. And after we say it, we're finally kicking him out of the family chat." I froze in the hallway, gripping the chairs so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt my ears burning. They were planning something at my house, in front of the whole family, and they were planning to humiliate me. I stepped back quietly before they noticed I was there. I set the chairs down in the garage and left without saying a word. My heart was pounding the whole drive home. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every possible scenario played out in my head. Were they going to bring up something from my past? Some embarrassing story? Were they going to criticize me in front of everyone? Was it going to be about the fact that I hadn't brought a date to Thanksgiving in 3 years? I kept replaying Carol's words. He needs to be humbled. The next morning, I was supposed to start cooking at dawn. Instead, I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the raw turkey, my phone buzzing with messages from family members confirming what they were bringing. For the first time ever, I didn't feel excited about Thanksgiving. I felt like I was walking into a trap, and that's when I made a decision that changed everything. I wish I could say that I snapped out of it, shook off the feeling, and went back to basting turkeys like a happy little chef. But no, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the quiet house around me. It felt wrong. The kitchen that usually buzzed with excitement the day before Thanksgiving was still. The utensils, the serving trays, the spices lined up in order. They all just seemed like props for someone else's play now. Around 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, overly cheerful. "You got the turkey in the oven yet?" I hesitated. "Not yet. Still getting things prepped." "Well, don't be late this year," she said quickly, almost like she was nervous. "We want to get started right on time. Everyone's very excited about this year's dinner." "Right?" I said, my throat dry. "Excited." She hung up before I could ask anything else. That single word, excited, was starting to sound like a threat. By noon, I convinced myself to at least start some prep work. If nothing else, I told myself, I didn't want to give them another reason to complain about me. So I cleaned the turkey, chopped vegetables, and made a timeline on the fridge with sticky notes. But something was different this year. Usually I had music playing, singing along to some classic rock, but this time I cooked in silence. Every little sound, the clink of a knife on the cutting board, the timer on the oven, felt loud. Then my sister Claire called. "Hey, chef," she said in that sing-song voice she uses when she's mocking me. "Hope you're ready for tonight. We have a special announcement planned." An announcement? I asked carefully. Oh yeah, she said, clearly grinning on the other end. But don't worry, you'll get to be front and center for it. I didn't answer, and she must have taken my silence as discomfort because she added, Hey, don't get all serious. It's just family fun. You take things way too personally. I forced a laugh and said, Right, family fun. But when we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at my reflection in the microwave door, and my stomach twisted again. Family fun. My family's version of fun had always been a little sharp. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the kid who got good grades, cleaned up after everyone, and made sure my younger cousins didn't burn the house down. And for some reason, that made me the default punchline. I was the one who got teased about being uptight, about never being spontaneous, about trying too hard. I learned to laugh it off, but there's only so many years you can take being the family punching bag before you start to wonder if maybe you really are too much. By 3 p.m., my kitchen was full of the smells of Thanksgiving, garlic, butter, rosemary, but I couldn't enjoy it. My phone kept lighting up with messages from the family group chat. My aunt sent a picture of a wine bottle with the caption, We're bringing the good stuff. We'll all need it tonight, followed by a laughing emoji. My cousin wrote, Can't wait for the show. The show. That word made my chest tighten. Then, as if the universe wanted to drive the point home, I got a call from my dad. He doesn't usually call on his own. It's almost always my mom or Carol, so my stomach sank as soon as I saw his name. Hey, Dad, I said cautiously. Edward, he said. His tone was almost businesslike. I just wanted to remind you, tonight's important. Don't make a scene. A scene? I said, my voice cracking slightly. Why would I make a scene? He sighed. Just keep your cool. You tend to get defensive, and we don't want any drama this year. I bit back 100 responses and finally said, Got it. No drama. But the call left me rattled. Why was he warning me not to get defensive unless they knew I'd have a reason to be? By late afternoon, my house looked perfect. Candles on the mantel, table set with the good china, food warm in the oven. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this was some sort of stage they were walking into, and I was the unwilling main act. The first to arrive was my stepmom, Carol. She walked in with a smug smile and didn't even bother to say hello before heading straight to the kitchen. She said, lifting the lid off one of my serving dishes. Smells good. At least you got this part right. This part? I asked. Oh, you know what I mean, she said with a wave of her hand, already pulling out her phone to snap pictures of the table. The food. You always do that well. It's the rest of it that we'll see about. I stood frozen for a moment, holding the carving knife in my hand, before finally saying, Glad you approve. The next few arrivals were similar, cousins whispering and snickering in the hallway, my aunt winking at me and saying, Oh, tonight's going to be memorable. My mom arrived last, carrying a pie, looking flushed and excited. Everything ready? She asked, scanning the table. Yeah, I said flatly. Perfect, she said. Let's eat. Then we can get to the good part. The good part. I felt my pulse quicken. As everyone sat down, I took my usual seat at the end of the table, carving knife in hand. Usually, this is my favorite moment of the whole year. Everyone quieting down, bowing their heads for grace, waiting for me to slice into the turkey. But this time, I could barely breathe. Mom cleared her throat dramatically. Before we dig in, she said, I just want to say how proud I am that we're all here together this year. And I think tonight will bring us even closer as a family. Everyone nodded and smiled, everyone except me. Then she looked straight at me and said, Edward, why don't you start carving? We don't want to keep everyone waiting. I stood, knife poised over the turkey, but something in her tone made me pause. I could feel every eye in the room on me. And that's when I heard Claire mutter, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh, this is going to be so good. I swear, when Claire muttered those words, it felt like the room got smaller. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. My hand tightened around the carving knife until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to smile. The same smile I've worn at every Thanksgiving for years. The one that says, I can take a joke, I can laugh along. But this time, something in me already knew. This wasn't going to be just a joke. I sliced the first piece of turkey, laying it neatly on the serving platter, and as I did, I caught my mom exchanging a quick look with Carol. It was just a split second, a nod, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching. But I was watching. Dinner started as usual. People passed around dishes, poured wine, complimented the food. For a brief moment, I almost let myself believe that maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe tonight would be like every other year, full of bickering and laughter and too much pie. But then my mom cleared her throat again. "So," she said, setting down her fork and smiling broadly. "Before we get too full and sleepy, we have a little surprise." The table quieted. Carol clasped her hands together. "Yes, we've been waiting all week for this." Claire leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Oh, this is going to be fun." I put my fork down slowly, my appetite gone. My mom looked directly at me. "Edward, you've been doing such a good job hosting Thanksgiving every year, keeping everything so perfect. But we all thought it was time to, well, be honest about a few things." A cold, prickly feeling spread through my chest. "Honest about what?" I asked carefully. "About how you've been acting," she said, her tone deceptively warm, like she was delivering good news. "You're always so serious, so controlling about everything. You have to have everything just so. The napkins folded a certain way, the turkey carved a certain way, everyone sitting exactly where you want them. And we've all been talking." "Talking," I repeated, my voice tightening. "Yes," she said, nodding toward Claire. "In fact, your sister has been keeping a little list." Claire grinned and pulled out her phone. "Oh yeah, we thought it would be fun to share all the times you've gone overboard, to lighten the mood." My stomach dropped. Before I could respond, Claire started reading from her phone. "Let's see," she said, scrolling dramatically. "Last year, Edward made us all wait 40 minutes before eating because the rolls weren't golden brown enough. Oh, and the year before that, he got mad that Uncle Tom brought store-bought cranberry sauce and not homemade. Oh, and remember when he made us all go around the table and say what we were thankful for, twice, because he said the first round didn't sound heartfelt enough?" Laughter rippled around the table. I sat frozen, gripping my chair so hard my fingers ached. "And who could forget," Claire continued, grinning, "the time Edward sent out a 7-page PDF with Thanksgiving guidelines? With diagrams of the table setting?" The table erupted into laughter now, real, loud laughter. My aunt wiped tears from her eyes. My uncle said between chuckles, "You really did that?" My mom beamed, clearly pleased with herself. "See? We're all just having fun, honey." I could feel my ears burning. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. Claire wasn't done. "And this year," she said dramatically, "we thought we'd do something special to help you loosen up a little." Before I could ask what she meant, two of my cousins jumped up and disappeared into the hallway, returning with a huge cardboard box. They set it on the table in front of me. "Go ahead," Claire said. "Open it." I hesitated, but everyone was staring at me expectantly, so I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside was a cheap paper crown, a plastic scepter, and a sash that said "Thanksgiving King." For a second, I just stared at it, not quite understanding. Then Carol clapped her hands. "Put it on," she said. "Come on, Edward," my mom urged, smiling like this was the sweetest thing in the world. "It's just a little joke." I sat there frozen. But before I could say anything, Claire grabbed the crown and shoved it on my head, and one of my cousins draped the sash across my chest. Someone snapped a picture. Someone else started chanting, "Speech! Speech!" I wanted to sink through the floor. They were laughing, all of them. Laughing at me. Not with me, at me. "This is what you wanted, right?" Claire said mockingly. "You're the king of Thanksgiving. Everything has to be your way, so we figured we'd make it official." The room roared with laughter again. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. The laughter died down just a little, enough for everyone to notice the look on my face. "Edward," my mom said cautiously. I looked around the table, at my mom's expectant smile, at Claire's smirk, at Carol's raised eyebrows, at the cousins barely containing their laughter, and for a split second, I thought about screaming. About telling them how cruel they were being. About how much work I put into making this day special every year. About how this house, this table, this meal were the only reasons they even had a Thanksgiving to gather around. But instead, I just stood there in silence. And that silence was louder than anything I could have said. My dad cleared his throat. "Sit down, son. We're just joking around." But I didn't sit. I took off the crown slowly, set it gently on the table, and said, very quietly, "You planned this." No one answered. "You all planned this." I repeated, louder this time. Still silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I turned, walked into the kitchen, and just stood there gripping the counter, staring at the turkey knife still lying on the cutting board. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with something else. Something that felt dangerously close to resolve. I don't know how long I stood there in the kitchen, but eventually, I heard the laughter start back up in the dining room. Quieter now, more awkward, but still there. They just moved on. Like nothing had happened. Like my humiliation was just another part of the entertainment. I leaned against the counter and let out a slow breath. My heart was still pounding in my chest, my palms damp. My house felt different now, like I was a guest in it. No, not even a guest, a prop. Eventually, my mom peeked her head into the kitchen. "Edward," she said gently, "come back to the table. Don't ruin dinner." Her words hit me like a slap. Don't ruin dinner. Like I was the one ruining it. Like I hadn't just been turned into the family clown in my own home. "I'm not hungry," I said without looking at her. There was a pause. "Well," she said, her tone sharpening, "at least bring out the pie before it gets cold." And then she was gone. I stood there for another minute, then walked upstairs, away from the noise, away from the smells of food, away from everything. I shut myself in my room and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the stupid sash they had draped across me. I tore it off and threw it into the corner. For the first time in years, I didn't feel proud of this house. Normally, when my family came over, I felt a little swell of pride seeing everyone gathered around the table I had set, under the lights I had hung, eating the meal I had worked so hard to make. But tonight, I felt empty. I could hear faint bits of conversation and laughter floating up from downstairs. At one point, Claire's voice rang out. Guess King Edward needed a royal nap, followed by more laughter. I stared at the ceiling, willing myself not to cry. I'm not the kind of person who cries easily, but something about the situation, the deliberate nature of it, the way they had planned this together, it felt like a deep betrayal. Not a spur-of-the-moment joke, but something they had been looking forward to. Something they had laughed about behind my back for days. And the worst part? They had done it here, in my home. I thought about all the hours I had spent getting everything ready, scrubbing the floors, polishing the silverware, ironing the tablecloth. I thought about the money I had spent on groceries, on wine, on extra chairs so no one would have to sit on a folding one. I thought about how, for years, I had been the one to make sure Thanksgiving happened at all, because no one else was willing to host. And this was how they repaid me. I sat there in silence until I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor downstairs, signaling the end of dinner. There was more laughter, the clatter of dishes being stacked, and then, one by one, I heard the front door open and close as people began leaving. No one came to check on me. No one knocked on the door. When the house finally went quiet, I went downstairs. The dining room looked like a battlefield, plates stacked haphazardly, crumbs everywhere, wine stains on the tablecloth. They hadn't even bothered to clean up properly. Something in me shifted right then. I started cleaning, not because I wanted to, but because I needed something to do with my hands. As I scrubbed the table, my mind started working in a way it hadn't before. I thought about the group chat. I thought about the look my mom and Carol exchanged. I thought about Claire's smirk. Piece by piece, I started putting it together. This wasn't just one night. This was a pattern. I had been bending over backward for years, hosting every major holiday, buying gifts for every niece and nephew, showing up for every birthday party, every graduation, and still, I was the butt of the joke. When I finished cleaning, I sat down at the table with a pen and paper. For the first time in my life, I made a list. Not a shopping list, not a cooking schedule, a list of everything I had done for this family over the past 5 years. Money spent, time taken off work, favors done. I filled nearly 2 pages before I stopped, staring at the numbers. I realized something in that moment. They had come to expect it. The reason they felt so comfortable mocking me, humiliating me in my own home, was because they thought I'd always forgive them. I'd always host next year. I'd always laugh it off. I'd always keep the peace. But as I sat there staring at that list, I knew something had to change. The next morning, my phone was full of messages. Mom, hope you've cooled off. Don't take last night so seriously. Claire, you disappeared. We were just trying to have fun. Carol, you need to learn to take a joke. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went into the group chat and removed myself. Then I blocked Claire's number. Then Carol's. For a few hours, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because I knew they'd notice. Relief, because for the first time, I wasn't just swallowing my anger. Later that day, my dad called. "You can't just leave the family chat," he said, sounding annoyed. "You're overreacting." "Maybe I am," I said quietly. "But I'm done being the family's punching bag." "Don't be dramatic," he said. "Thanksgiving is supposed to be about family." "It was," I said, "until last night." And I hung up. That evening, I went to the grocery store and bought myself a single-serve frozen dinner. I sat on the couch, ate it in silence, and watched a movie. It was the most peaceful night I'd had in years. But as I sat there, a new thought began forming, slow, quiet, but persistent. If they thought last night was memorable, what would they think when I stopped playing along entirely? And that was the first time I caught myself smiling since Thanksgiving. The morning after my quiet frozen dinner evening, I woke up later than usual and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: lightness. There were no frantic group messages buzzing on my phone, no reminders from my mom about next year's menu, no sarcastic jabs from Claire. For the first time in what felt like forever, my house was silent. And it was my silence, not the tense, awkward kind, but the kind that feels like a fresh sheet of snow. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table where my family had humiliated me just days before. The tablecloth was washed and folded, the dishes put away. If it weren't for the faint memory of that stupid paper crown lying in the trash, you'd never know anything had happened. And that's when it hit me. They had expected me to get over it already. By now, I was supposed to be texting apologies for overreacting or inviting them to come by for leftovers. They had probably all laughed about it in their own group chats, patting themselves on the back for teaching me to lighten up. But no one had apologized. No one had even admitted that what they did was cruel. Instead, I was getting messages like, "So, are you hosting Christmas too or not?" I deleted the message without replying. In the days that followed, something in me started to shift. At first it was subtle. I started saying no to things I'd usually agree to, like helping Claire's kids with their science projects or picking up groceries for my mom. I stopped being available on demand. I stopped making myself the default solution to every family inconvenience. And surprisingly, the world didn't end. In fact, my life got better. With the extra time, I started going to the gym again, something I'd neglected for years because I was always running around doing favors. At first, I was clumsy, sore, and out of breath, but after a few weeks, I started feeling stronger. I was sleeping better. My clothes fit differently. Work, too, started improving. I'd been quietly grinding away at my job for years, never making waves, never asking for recognition. But something about setting boundaries with my family gave me a new kind of confidence. I started speaking up more in meetings, pitching ideas instead of just nodding along. To my surprise, people listened. One day, my boss pulled me aside after a presentation. "You've been doing excellent work lately," she said. "How would you feel about taking on a leadership role for the new project in January?" I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was almost giddy. That night, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine and thought about how far I'd come in just a few weeks. For so long, my identity had been tied to my role in the family: the good son, the responsible one, the dependable host. And when they laughed at me, it had felt like an attack on who I was. But now, I was starting to see that I was more than that. I had a life outside of them. I had friends, co-workers, ambitions. And slowly, the anger that had been sitting like a stone in my chest started to turn into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. Christmas came and went, and for the first time ever, I didn't host. In fact, I didn't even attend. I got a dozen texts asking where I was, followed by more accusing me of being dramatic, but I stayed firm. Instead, I spent Christmas with a couple of close friends, playing board games and eating takeout Chinese food. It was simple, quiet, and perfect. New Year's rolled around, and I went to a party with some coworkers. At midnight, as everyone counted down, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was entering a new year without feeling obligated to anyone but myself. That thought was liberating. In January, I accepted the leadership position at work. It meant more hours, but also a significant raise. With the extra money, I finally made a few upgrades I had been putting off: a new sofa, better cookware, and a fresh coat of paint in the dining room. That room had been tainted with memories of my family's laughter, but as I painted it a warm, new color, it felt like reclaiming it. Then came the real turning point. One afternoon, While grabbing coffee near the office, I ran into my cousin Lauren, one of the quieter conspirators from Thanksgiving night. She looked surprised to see me and, after some awkward small talk, finally blurted, "You know, Claire says you're being ridiculous about the whole Thanksgiving thing." I stared at her for a moment and then smiled, not in anger, but in a way that seemed to throw her off. "Tell Claire I said thanks," I said simply, and walked away. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe them an explanation. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing through the grapevine that my absence at family events was making things difficult. Mom had apparently had to host Easter planning meetings herself this year, and Claire was complaining that Edward isn't pulling his weight. Hearing that actually made me laugh. Pulling my weight. For years, I had been carrying the weight of the entire family's holiday expectations, and the second I set it down, they acted like I had betrayed them. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about me taking a break. This was about me showing them that I was done playing the role they had cast me in. That if they wanted to keep treating me like a prop in their little family comedy routine, they were going to do it without me. I started planning, quietly and methodically. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my coworkers. But I knew that when Thanksgiving rolled around this year, I wasn't just going to skip dinner. I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had lost when they decided to humiliate me. I started saving a little extra from every paycheck. I made calls to caterers and rental companies, not for this year, but for the future. I even began working on a few recipes, not the elaborate ones I used to make, but something new, something that would make next year's dinner unforgettable. Because if they thought last year's Thanksgiving was memorable, they hadn't seen anything yet. By the time summer rolled around, I was no longer the same person who had stood frozen in his own dining room while his family laughed at him. My mornings started early at the gym, my work days were full but satisfying, and my evenings were spent doing things for myself, trying new recipes, reading books I'd put off for years, catching up on old hobbies. But even with all those improvements, a single thought kept circling in the back of my mind. Thanksgiving was coming. Every time I passed a grocery store display of turkeys or saw a new autumn recipe online, my stomach would tighten just a little. Not with dread anymore, but with anticipation. In late August, I got a call from my mom, the first one in months. "Edward," she said, her voice unusually polite. "So, we were wondering if you'd be willing to host Thanksgiving again this year." I actually laughed, not out loud, but that quiet kind of laugh you let slip when you can't believe what you're hearing. "I thought you all wanted a different kind of Thanksgiving," I said carefully. "Oh, honey, last year was just a silly thing," she said breezily, as though orchestrating a public humiliation in my own house was no bigger deal than a misplaced napkin. "You know how your sister gets. We were just teasing." I let her words hang there for a moment, then said, "I'll think about it." And for the next 2 months, that's exactly what I did: think, plan, prepare. I knew one thing. If I did decide to host, it wouldn't be for them. It would be for me. Then came the break I didn't know I needed. At work, the project I had been leading all year ended up being a massive success. My boss called me into her office and told me that the company wanted to give me a year-end bonus, a big one. Enough to cover all my expenses for a few months if I wanted. I thanked her, kept my professional face on, but the second I got back to my desk, I started running numbers in my head. With the bonus, plus the money I had been quietly saving all year, I realized I had more than enough to pull off something dramatic. But I didn't just want dramatic. I wanted calculated. I wanted to make them feel what I had felt: blindsided, off balance, forced to sit with the uncomfortable truth about themselves. So, I got strategic. I started reaching out to vendors, discreetly, quietly, using my personal email, caterers, decorators, even a few local event planners. I didn't tell them the full story, just that I wanted something unforgettable, something that would impress a family used to traditional dinners. At the same time, I kept my distance from my family. I wanted them to miss me. I wanted them to feel the gap I left behind when I stopped organizing everything. And apparently, it was working. One afternoon, my aunt accidentally called me while meaning to call someone else, and I overheard her say, "If Edward doesn't host again, I'm not doing it. I'm not cleaning up after everyone." That little comment told me everything. They had taken my efforts for granted for so long that now, without me, their holidays were falling apart. But the real turning point came in early November. I was leaving the office when I ran into Claire, of all people, waiting outside the building. She must have found out where I worked from my mom, because she looked way too pleased with herself. Edward, she said, giving me a smile that was meant to be disarming. We need to talk. I didn't say anything, just raised an eyebrow. Look, last year got a little out of hand, she admitted, though her tone made it sound more like she was confessing to spilling a drink than humiliating me. Mom really wants us all together this year. You know she can't handle hosting. So can we just forget it ever happened? I studied her for a moment. Forget it, I said finally. Claire, you planned it. She shrugged. We thought it would be funny. And was it? I asked. She didn't answer, just looked away. I let the silence stretch, then said, I'll let you know if I'm hosting. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of hope and confusion. She wasn't expecting me to have that kind of control over the situation. That night, I sat at my desk with a notepad and went through every single detail I wanted to get right. Not just the food, everything. The seating arrangement, the timing, even the music. But more importantly, I planned for what would come after dinner. Because this time, there was going to be a moment, a big one, and I was going to be the one controlling it. As Thanksgiving drew closer, I sent out a single message to the group chat. Yes, I rejoined it, just for this. Thanksgiving dinner. My place. November 28th. That was it. No emojis, no enthusiasm, no extra details. The replies rolled in quickly, excited, relieved, full of smiley faces and exclamation marks. Finally, Claire wrote, So glad we're back on track, Carol added. But they didn't know what kind of track I had in mind. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, I worked like I always did, but this time, I wasn't just cooking, I was orchestrating. I confirmed the caterer, finalized the menu, arranged the delivery schedule, and quietly hired someone to handle cleanup afterward. For the first time ever, I wasn't going to spend Thanksgiving running around the kitchen sweating and exhausted. I was going to sit back, smile, and watch everything unfold. The night before Thanksgiving, I walked through the house and looked at the dining room. It looked perfect, better than perfect. But the real perfection wasn't in the food or the decor. It was in the knowledge that tomorrow, I wouldn't be the one standing in the corner of the kitchen gripping the counter while everyone laughed at me. Tomorrow, they were going to be the ones squirming. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt calm for the first time since last year. This Thanksgiving wasn't just going to be different. It was going to be unforgettable. Thanksgiving morning felt different this year. There was no frantic rush to peel potatoes or baste the turkey. No sticky notes cluttering the fridge, no last-minute panic about whether we had enough chairs. Everything had already been handled. I woke up at 8, showered, and had a quiet breakfast, nothing fancy, just coffee and toast, while watching the morning news. By 10, the caterers arrived, a small team that worked like a well-oiled machine, setting out food, arranging platters, and making sure everything was perfect. For once, I wasn't sweating over a hot oven. I was free to walk around, check on things, and just breathe. By noon, the house looked like something out of a magazine. The table was immaculate, gold chargers, polished glassware, fresh flowers in the center. The turkey, which had been roasted to perfection by professionals, gleamed under the dining room lights. When the doorbell rang at 4, I was ready. The first guests trickled in, my parents, Carol, and Claire. I greeted them politely, but with just enough coolness to remind them I hadn't forgotten. Claire, clearly trying to play the peacemaker, said, Wow, Edward, you really outdid yourself this year. Thanks, I said simply, stepping aside so they could see the spread. Their eyes widened. I could see the surprise on their faces. They had expected me to put together another home-cooked dinner, but this was next level. This looked expensive, professional, deliberate. Slowly, the rest of the family arrived, each of them reacting with similar awe. Compliments started flying almost immediately. This is beautiful. Edward, this must have taken forever. Where did you get those centerpieces? I just smiled. Glad you like it. Dinner began, and everything went exactly as I'd planned. The food was perfect, the drinks flowed freely, and conversation started to relax everyone into that familiar holiday rhythm. They were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different, that I had finally let go and moved on. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. Halfway through the meal, my mom dabbed at her lips with her napkin and said, Edward, I'm just so glad we're all here together again. This is how Thanksgiving is supposed to be. Yeah, Claire added, smiling. Much better than last year's drama, right? I let that hang in the air for a beat, then set down my glass. I'm glad you brought that up, I said calmly. The table went quiet. I stood slowly, taking my time. Last year, I began, my voice steady. You all decided that humiliating me in my own home would be entertaining. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You planned it ahead of time. You talked about it behind my back. You turned something that I loved, this day, this meal, into a stage where I was the punchline. Edward, my mom began, but I held up a hand. No, I said, still calm. You had your turn last year. Now it's mine. I reached under the table and pulled out a folder I had placed there earlier. Inside were copies of the list I had made months ago. Every holiday I had hosted, every dollar I had spent, every time I had rearranged my life to accommodate them. I passed the copies around the table. This, I said, is what I have done for this family since I started hosting. Every single holiday, every single expense. I did it because I wanted to, because I thought it mattered. And this, I gestured to the room, to the food, to the perfect table, is the last time I will ever do it for you. There was a stunned silence. I wanted you to see, I continued, what it looks like when someone puts in effort not out of obligation, but out of choice. When someone cares enough to do it right. And I wanted you to enjoy it, because after tonight, you are on your own. My dad frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, I replied evenly, that this is the last holiday I will ever host. I will not be the family's unpaid event planner anymore. I will not spend weeks cleaning, cooking, and coordinating so I can be laughed at. If you want Thanksgiving next year, you can host it yourselves. Claire blinked, clearly stunned. You can't just. I can, I said, cutting her off. And I am. I let that sink in for a moment, then delivered the final part of my plan. Oh, and by the way, I added casually, the caterers are packing up the leftovers and taking them with them when they leave. So if anyone wants seconds, I'd get them now. There was a small gasp from someone at the table. Yes, I said. That means there will be no containers full of turkey for you to take home this year. No free meals for the rest of the weekend. Tonight, you eat what's here, and when it's gone, it's gone. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, for good measure, I smiled. Not the forced, placating smile I had worn last year, but a genuine one, the kind that said I was completely in control. Now, I said, sitting back down, who wants pie? The rest of the meal was quiet, eerily quiet. No one made jokes. No one laughed. For the first time in years, I was the one who held the room in silence. And it felt incredible. As dinner wrapped up, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. Then, as the caterers began clearing plates, I added, you'll find the front door unlocked. Happy Thanksgiving. One by one, they got up, gathering their coats in silence, their faces pale and stunned. And as the last guest stepped out into the cold November night, I stood in the doorway, watching them go, my house warm and glowing behind me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. That night, after the last taillight disappeared down my street, I closed the door, locked it, and let out a long, slow breath. The house was quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt earned. The caterers finished packing up the last of the trays and handed me the receipt. I thanked them and slipped them an extra tip, feeling almost giddy as I watched them load the food into their van and drive away. No leftovers. No mess for me to clean. No family lingering in the living room pretending to help while making little jabs. Just silence. Real, peaceful silence. I sat down at the head of the table, still set with the beautiful plates and half-burnt candles, and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time since I could remember, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. I didn't feel like the night had taken something out of me. This time, I felt like I had taken something back. The fallout began the next morning. At 7:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with the first message. Mom, Edward, we need to talk about last night. Then Claire, seriously? Taking the leftovers? That was petty. Carol, we all feel like you overreacted. You made everyone uncomfortable. I stared at the screen, sipping my coffee. Then, without replying, I set the phone down and went for a run. By the time I got back, there were 12 missed calls. 2 from my dad, 5 from Claire, even 1 from my aunt, who never calls. I made breakfast, sat by the window, and ate slowly, ignoring the constant buzzing. Later that afternoon, my dad finally left a voicemail. Son, what you did last night was out of line. You embarrassed your mother in front of the entire family. You need to apologize and fix this before Christmas." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Christmas. That was the part that made me laugh out loud. They still thought there would be a Christmas. Over the next few days, the messages escalated. Claire accused me of ruining Thanksgiving for everyone. My mom sent a long, tearful text about how family is all we have and how I was tearing us apart. Carol sent me a passive-aggressive photo of her kids eating frozen pizza with the caption, "Glad you're teaching them valuable lessons about generosity." But here's the thing, none of it worked. For the first time ever, their guilt trips didn't land. I didn't feel like the bad guy, because I wasn't. I knew what they were really upset about. Not that I had been petty, not that I had overreacted, but that I had taken away their favorite thing, the free labor, the guaranteed meal, the ability to laugh at me and still expect me to serve dessert. And without me, they had nothing to fall back on. Word started trickling in through relatives who were less involved that Christmas dinner had been a disaster. Claire had tried to host, but her kitchen wasn't big enough. The turkey had come out dry, and half the cousins ended up eating takeout by the end of the night. I didn't go. Instead, I spent Christmas in the mountains with a couple of friends, sitting by a fire, drinking hot cocoa, and watching the snow fall. When New Year's rolled around, I got a single text from my mom. "We miss you. Can we start over?" I sat with that message for a while. I could feel a part of me softening, remembering the years before all the tension, before the humiliation, before everything boiled over. But then I remembered standing in my kitchen last Thanksgiving, hands shaking, staring at the counter while everyone laughed in the other room. I remembered the sash, the crown, the chanting, and I knew my answer. I typed back, "You can start over. Without me." Then I blocked the group chat entirely and turned off my phone. That night, I sat on my couch, the house quiet except for the sound of the fireplace crackling, and I smiled. A small, calm smile. For years, I had given my family everything they asked for. And for once, I had given myself something back. I raised my glass in the empty room and said softly, "Happy New Year, Edward." And it was